Something a little bit different today. I want to look at Science Fiction, What It's All About by Sam J. Lundwall. This copy here in 1971, but originally it was published in Sweden in 1969. Lundwall is a Swede. I'm not going to attempt the title here. This Ace edition from 1971 was reprinted later on in 1975. You'll see there's a little bit different font on that one, and this one here is priced 95 cents, and the 1975 one was $1.50. But what's a little bit different today is I want to look at just one chapter in here. Chapter 4, which is called An Air-Conditioned Nightmare. The previous chapter talks about utopias in science fiction. This one is going to talk about dystopias. But what I found fascinating about it was the comparison of utopias and dystopias. Let's briefly take a look at who Sam J. Lundwall is in the first place. Sam J. Lundwall is a Swedish science fiction writer, translator, publisher, and singer. He translated a number of science fiction-related articles and works from Swedish into English. He's written a number of short stories and novels, some of which have been translated into English. For example, in 1971, there was an ace double with No Time for Heroes, Survival Technique for a One-Man Planet Team Run, and Alice's World, Terra Through the Science Fiction Looking Glass. And then there were a couple of DAW books, Bernard the Conqueror, and 1984, A Clockwork Orange, and now 2018 AD, or The King Kong Blues, the bestseller SF novel that shocked Sweden. He's still with us at the age of 84. As I said, I want to talk about utopias and dystopias from this chapter. I think his views may have been very popular, or interesting at least, because he wrote a book later on in 1977 titled Utopia versus Dystopia. Let's take a look at the beginning of the chapter. Chapter 4, The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. Many science fiction writers are incurable misanthropes. This might be the result of an uncommonly pessimistic inclination or a gentle perspicacity, but the fact is that few modern SF writers have found reason to regard the future with any great hope. I am now speaking of those works that deal with the future as a consequence of the present day, not those that depict a future situation according to its own terms. These will be discussed in a later chapter. The future will turn out to be just like our own time, they observe, only worse. And then they summon forth a hell on earth where the citizens are kept at bay by thought police, and the big industrial trusts rule the people with a more or less obvious line of hard advertising toward ever-increasing consumption and consequently rising opulence for the shareholders. The social dreams of the Victorians have been exchanged for scathing social criticism that, while most often based on cold hard facts, sometimes topples on the borders of defeatism. The latter is commonly known as the New Wave Syndrome of science fiction. Interesting. I'm not sure that's a great definition for New Wave. Continuing. The fact anti-utopian novel, speculating in the results of processes already at work in our time, might show a future a la Harry Harrison's Make Room, in which the year 1999 moves towards its end, and New York is overpopulated with 35 million desperate inhabitants, where hunger strikes are the order of the day, and where the minimum living space, as prescribed by law, is 4 square yards per person, without water or outflow. The environment pollution has long ago passed the limit where it was merely catastrophic. Human lives are worthless. Over it all hovers the specter of the final war as a black, threatening shadow. And after the novel, the author adds a list of recommended reading which proves that it probably will turn out to be much worse. Or The Jagged Orbit from 1969 by the brilliant British SF writer John Brunner, in which the 21st century is ruled by the huge, ruthless Gottschalk weaponry combine, which sells weapons to anyone, anywhere, with predictable results. Or Teenocracy from 1969 by Robert Shirley, in which the teenagers have taken over the USA for good, which means that if you ain't hip, you're out. The members of the cabinet are chosen by a sort of Russian roulette, and the president is a tough rock star, name of the Fab. It makes one long for the uncomplicated golden days of 1984. As late as 1931, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, originally as a conscious parody of H.G. Wells' Men Like Gods, as a horror vision of something that was possible but highly improbable, the artificial, promiscuous, drugged, and enslaved humanity of the year 632 AF, after Ford. The most effective tool to keep the citizenry at bay was the same apathy drug, Soma, that Thomas More invented for the people of Utopia. 15 years later, the novel is furnished with a new foreword in which Huxley sadly observed that the horror vision was not as distant as he in 1931 had thought. Huxley still thought that sanity existed, even though it was a rather rare phenomenon. He was convinced that it could be achieved and that he would like to see more of it. A critic retorted that Huxley was a sad symptom of the failure of an intellectual class in the time of crisis. Huxley replied and pointed out the real sinners. The benefactors of humanity deserve due honor and commemoration. Let us build a pantheon for professors. It should be located among the ruins of one of the gutted cities of Europe or Japan, and over the entrance to the ossuary I would inscribe, in letters 6 or 7 feet high, the simple words, "Sacred to the memory of the world's educators. Sae monumentum requiris circumspice." This is the epitaph of Christopher Wren, architect of St. Paul's in London. It means, "If you seek his monument, look around." So from the increased pessimism of Huxley, we move on to Orwell's 1984. Lundwall makes a very interesting comparison and contrast of 1984 with Frederick Pohl's and Cyril M. Kornbluth's The Space Merchants, originally titled Gravy Planet, which tells about a not-too-distant future in which the big corporations have taken power and money is king. The New York of the Space Merchants is diametrically opposite the London of 1984, but in the end, the slavery is all the same. Big Brother kicks his subjects into obedience. The new industrial tycoons drug them. If you want a picture of the future, O'Brien says in 1984, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. It hardly matters much to the victim if the boot bears the sign of a swastika or a Coca-Cola bottle. The difference is that in the latter case, the victim can even be made to pay for the privilege of being trampled upon. The chapter goes on to take a look at these dystopias, and it is really a depressing look. Close to the end, though, we get to Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. In this novel, military service is required to be a voting member of society. Lundwall argues this is more of a utopia. He also says the only thing that makes it less than a classical utopian novel is that it contains so much violence and gore that no sane utopian would stay there for 5 seconds. Utopians are a peaceful lot. Heinlein is not. Now this sounds like a thoroughly fascist state, and Starship Troopers has been subjected to a murderous criticism in SF circles, especially after it was awarded with science fiction's highly coveted Hugo Award in 1959. Myself, I would rather leave than love a country run along the lines of Heinlein's Utopia, but Heinlein has constructed his society with a logic that is rather seductive. You can accuse Heinlein for a lot of things, but never for faulty logic. In Heinlein's world, the right to vote is thus a privilege that has to be earned with a specified individual contribution of work. He proceeds, probably rightly, from the assumption that a person who is too lazy to earn this privilege also is too lazy to revolt against the established order of things. Thus, no silent majority. If we look at our own society, the idea does not look so foolish. A great deal of the voters in the Western world do, as is well known, not vote so much on party platform as on the party candidate's appearance and morale, their own parents' political preferences, and so on. A right to vote that had to be earned with hard labor in 2 or 3 years would probably be exercised with much more consideration. Heinlein's thesis seems, in short, to be that lazy people without knowledge of politics should not be permitted to participate in something as serious as politics. And who can dispute that? What can be discussed is the fact that military service is the only chance to prove that you are not a lazy slob, and the horrible pacifists are already from the start excluded from any possibility of changing the rules. There are no conscientious objectors in Heinlein's world, just voters, war veterans, and non-voters, draft dodgers, effeminate snobs, pacifists, and other animals of low standing. The belief in authority and the individual subjection that the military system impresses upon its disciples is, although commendable in a situation of war, hardly worth striving for in a democratic society. Starship Troopers has, as I have said, been the cause of a very lively debate for and against the military establishment in magazines, fanzines, and at least one SF novel, Harry Harrison's witty and intelligent Bill the Galactic Hero from 1966. A catch-22 on a magnificent cosmic scale. Whatever views one might take on the matter, one can't deny that Starship Troopers has done a lot of good in this respect by stimulating an interesting debate. It is disturbing, and what shall good science fiction do if not disturb? Moving now to the concluding paragraphs of this chapter. Personally, I find the anti-utopian science fiction extremely interesting, but it shows only one side of the matter. It is anti, but never pro. It gives criticism, but never even attempts a solution. Just as the utopian story is escapist, its antithesis is defeatist. It must always be so. There is an unfortunate tendency in all literature to view all changes with deepest suspicion and to put the worst construction on everything new. It would be very strange indeed if this did not pervade science fiction to a degree as well. No doubt many people in the year 2025 will look back to the wonderful golden days of 1971 when everything was so much better, and regard the new starships and what have you with grave misgivings, feeling the ground rock beneath their feet. This is as it should be, and the anti-utopian novel has done a lot of good by pointing out faults in society's machinery, but one should not stare oneself blind on this side of the coin. Basically, the anti-utopian novel is just a way of saying, as Cyril M. Kornbluth puts it in the science fiction novel, I will show you what will happen if you don't listen to me and do as I say, as opposed to the utopian message of, see how beautiful and orderly everything will be if you make me dictator over the world. The difference is slight, and in the end, they both come down to the same thing, an inability to face the present world. The anti-utopian novel is interesting, and as a means of social criticism, unsurpassed. It should be read with a pinch of salt, though. The future isn't all sour grapes. I found this chapter by Lundwall fascinating. In one video in the past, I asked the question, is science fiction more optimistic or pessimistic? I think it's the same question here. More utopian or anti-utopian or dystopia? And is there really a difference? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Until next time, look to the future and keep reading.